The article that I found discusses how to discuss difficult topics in history. Obviously, as somebody that's going to teach history, I understand that there are a lot difficult times in history, and sometimes I'm not the best at addressing those head on. Sometimes I am. Sometimes it's just gets to be an argument though. But I wanted to look at an article that would give me some different ways I could, you know, um, I could teach those without it being too controversial or without it being difficult, if that makes sense. I don't think that was the exact word that I should have used, but this article gives three different ways that you can teach these. They give the way of fight, flight, or light. Let me go back all the way up to the top here. So essentially what it does is it talks about these three different teachers and it discusses three different ways that they taught fight, flight, or light. And each one is a different method. So the way of fight is they give it an example at the beginning. This also talks about like the reason of teaching difficult past and like what they are essentially, how important they are to different, like how we kind of talked about in I don't know, actually, I don't think it was in the book, the reading where it talks about how like there are different parts of schooling that this applies to. And that kind of talks on that. It talks about the affair, I can't pronounce it, but the Altalena affair, and that's the example that it uses for this. It talks about the different way, like the instruments in data collection, data analysis. But what I want to look at in more detail is the way that they taught. So the first one is Shira. She uses more of the fight, which is essentially they take the people and the conflict and they put that up front. So it's like like you turn to fight it head on. So she emphasized the two elements, conflict and historical figures, and she discusses this is what happened, this is the people involved, but she takes it to a more advanced level. She takes it to reading between the lines, like why did this happen? Look at these people, look at their motives, their reasons, and see if you can determine what happened. Like what why did this happen? One gives the example of it might have been a war of egos, but it's ultimately it turns the conversation to the students and it lets them make complex and ethical decisions and see like why did this happen. But ultimately it makes it known that the teacher is still in charge of conversation and she would actively steer conversation to search for the motives for the aggressive actions, and essentially she led the conversation in a way that she wanted without it being too controversial and allowing for the students to have their own thoughts and make their own decisions about it. This is a way you can like add in primary documents and see. Um, the second one was more when you establish a state, there are difficulties. So this is more of the flight sort of mechanism. You don't necessarily focus on the people and the events, you more relate it. So like in this one, it talks about how nobody gets pointed up out. The conflict is more less focused on and it's more generalized. Uh, it also in this example, it also talks about they distance themselves from the historical figures by using generic figures. So it talks about how like the events may have started, and it does it not in a way that's like immediately this guy did this. It's more of a yeah, so this happened and then this happened, but it's also made in a way where the students can relate to it. So it's like an everyday sort of situation, which I think is an interesting take on it. I think it might work. This is my own thought. I think it might work really well, but I also don't know if it would be as good as just having conversation. I think it could eventually lead to it. It also talks about how like it switches from past and present. So it's like it goes to a past conflict and adds it to the present. And so it allows for you to draw parallels between what was the Altalena affair, and she uses a school fight that is familiar to students. So it allows to draw parallels between them and be like, this happened because of this, which I think is an interesting way of doing things. She does refer directly, but it's more related to government, sovereign authority, and settling scores. So it's like building a state is what it is essentially, is as it says at the beginning. The last one didn't focus on the events, violence, or historical figures. It rather did difficultly related to conveying the controversial content. Content. She more, I don't really know exactly the best way of explaining it, but it's like personified the ship by attributing human reaction or human actions to it, and like it tried to do this. It it allowed for her to not have to approach the controversial aspects of this, but it allowed for her to still approach it and other places, so that she could, still talk about it, but without the controversial effect to it and making anybody mad or be insensitive about it. It allows for discussion to happen. All three do. And again, this is just on the fight, the flight, and the light. So, yeah, I think that looking at this article helped me a lot because it gave me different methods of teaching difficult subjects without being insensitive, and all while giving students a thought process essentially and allowing for that to take place.